And those who last year know that you did a great job, and you actually, you sent in a article for us to read and then place your session around it. But then I told you that a lot of were young scholars, postgrad students, and so perhaps we need to gently make them, start with this. So you are an assistant professor at the School of Humanities and Social Science at LUMS. You are a historical anthropologist. That's a tough one. And you have specialized in transnational mobility and military labor markets. And I have to ask you what that is. I've seen labor markets, but I haven't heard of military labor markets. Could you explain that a bit?
Yeah, so, thank you so much for introducing me. So I am, I'm in this oddball position of being between two disciplines. So my training technically is in anthropology, but much of my work has been archival. And I've also done a lot of policy and political science work. And a lot of it derives from the area that the issue that I focused on, military labor market. So basically, I study in all over the Persian Gulf. Most of the militaries and police forces over there are formed by labor that is imported from other countries.
Oh.
And over the last, and this is a very historical process. Like, this has been going on not just now, but since the 16th century. But there has been a revival in the last 10 to 15 years with, if most of you would be familiar with, like, private military companies. So there's a rise in private military companies all around the world.
Contractors.
So contractors, private military contractors. So that is basically what I study, like private military contracting.
I don't try doing that in Pakistan. Anyway, so you are also working on a book project titled Conquest Without Rule, Baloch, Portfolio Soldiers and the Indian Ocean. My God, that looks exciting, which examines state building in the region from the perspective of a diasporic group that has a strong presence in the military infrastructure of various littoral states since the 16th century, despite not having a state of their own. Wow, even reading that makes my gray cells agitate. And you have earned your PhD in cultural anthropology from Duke University, a very prestigious one. And then before joining LUMS, you served in the Arabia Asia cluster head at the Middle East Institute, National University of Singapore, as a postdoctoral fellow at the Oriental Institute, also at the Czech Academy of Sciences. So you've literally been from all over the world, from the far across the oceans to the Far East, to the Middle West, and anyway. So an honor to have you. And we can see that you're going to talk about epistemology as to what is the nature of knowledge in research. But then whatever you give in this session, all of us have to relate it to our own disciplines and what it means once applied to our discipline. So you're going to talk about, Gohar, can we go on to the agenda, please? And so you're going to talk about different types of theories. And I'm sorry, I think Gohar has got stuck up somewhere. I can't see it on my screen somehow, Gohar. Anyway, so you're going to talk about different types of theories, and you're also going to, the takeaway for us would be to apply it to our So over to you, Amin.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for that very kind introduction. As I said, so I'm glad to be opening this lecture of this very important series. It's very important series in specifically because there is a serious issue with thinking about research in the global South. And for some reason, there is this idea that we who live in the global South, and by global South, I mean, like in the old world, in days before, you used to call it the third world. Now we call it the global south, and there's reasons behind it. But so we always think of ourselves as consumers of knowledge, and we think of ourselves as people who take knowledge and apply it in different situations, but we seldom think of ourselves as the creators of knowledge. And I think that is a serious injustice that we do to our own skills, to our own understanding, to our own kind of mental capacity as well, to our ability to change things and to push the literature in new directions. It's a real disservice when we do that. And it is, the roots of this are, very inherently colonial, that the structure of knowledge as it exists, or the power structure of knowledge as it exists, it makes us think that the knowledge producers have to be in the globe, in the north, right? So people in Europe, people in North America, they come up with theories, they come up with models. We in the global south either apply them, or we mimic them, we mirror them, we copy them, but we don't create new ones of our own. So, and that is why I think a course such as this is essential. It's essential for you to think about research in a more organized, systematic way. Because if we are to think about our own work as, or our own selves as knowledge producers, we need to kind of really understand, where do we fit into this entire, let's call it, architecture of knowledge. Yeah. So where do we fit into this architecture of knowledge? We so that, and I think that is a very important first step to start. It's a very important first step to start, or how, especially because I know one of the main challenges here is that we have people from very various different disciplines. I know some of you are from computer science, some of you are from engineering background, some maybe from biology, some humanities, economics. So it's a very wide range of people who we have here. And conversations across these disciplines is not always very natural, because often, and this is again, this comes back to a problem, because we think of ourselves only as appliers of knowledge, and we think of it, our understanding, only in very technical terms. So we can very well explain to you certain theories within our own disciplines. We can very well explain to you, very specific researches that we do. But it's hard for a lot of us to abstract outwards, or to make a case for why our very specific study of, let's say, one kind of biological cell, or one kind of circuit, or one village, yeah, or 10 years in history. Why is that very specific knowledge, just very specific understanding, why is it relevant to human sciences at large, to the understanding of the world, or world's understanding of sciences at large? Very hard for us to make that case, or we seldom make that case. And that is one of the main reasons why it is inhibiting. We don't always talk amongst each other. Of course, there's some conversation. History and anthropology, somewhat similar. So there is some conversations, but uh, anthropology and biology, is there a conversation between the two? Is there a conversation between economics and computer science? I would say there is. And I want to make the case there is a great conversation to have. But in order to understand where that conversation what are the points at which both of these things can intersect. For that to you to realize that common point of intersection, it is important for us to realize this kind of structure of knowledge. And that's what I want to talk about today. I'm not going to get into too much of the specific methods, because I think that is a very important part, because this is a longer course, and other talks will kind of get into it in more detail. But what I want to do is I want to talk about that structure more specifically. So if I could just share the slide, Gaur, can I just stop this and share my slide? Is that okay? Do it.
Yeah, you are the co-host. You can.
Okay, okay. All right. So can you guys see my slides?
Yes.
Okay. Where is it? Okay. Yeah, you see my slides now. So there is you already see from the title that I want to talk about not just epistemology but ontology. And ontology, I mean, these words are often more intimidating than the idea themselves. So I don't want you guys to be very intimidated by the word in itself. And we'll, I promise we'll, I'll talk about it and I'll give you a better idea um, about how to do it, about what it means. Oops, sorry. Did my PowerPoint close?
Yeah,
Oh
it
no,
did.
wait.
I think you were trying to
Oh,
bring up a presentation of ontology, and
yes. Sorry.
it's
One
okay.
second.
There's enough time. We can
Uh,
wait.
okay.
Take,
Now it's working again.
we don't see it, so perhaps if you do.
Oh, let me see.
Gohar, can you put on the memes?
Mm, I can do it. Just 1 second. Give me 1 second. 1 second.
Yeah, because you
Yeah.
need to do it at your end. Yeah,
Yes.
there we go. We
We
have
can
it.
see it now. Yeah, clear.
Yeah.
Okay. Now presenter result. All right. So as I said, this is going to be, it sounds more sophisticated and more complicated it is, and we'll talk through it. But it is important to start one way earlier. Uh, I have the first slide to just to give you an idea about the kind of diverse background that I come from myself. I've already talked about a little bit. I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but just to give you an indication about the kind of work that I did. I mean, I talked about the markets and military stuff, which is a very historical and anthropological way of thinking about things. But then I also did this, I've worked in policy departments too. I've worked with foreign diplomats in Singapore, and I've tried to translate my understanding of anthropology and history into a language that is understandable to policymakers and government officials as well. Lately, I have also taken on actually intellectual partnerships with biologists as well. I have an ongoing project on urban water quality or urban water inequalities that I'm doing with a biologist. So where we do water testing and we do surveys and we do ethnographies around it. And this is just to give you an indication about the range of ways in which people now are breaking away from disciplinary boundaries to think about new ways on collaborating and producing new knowledge and new information. So, and this is, and I'm happy to talk about in more detail when we get onto it later. But let's get directly into the PowerPoint, like into the presentation itself. Yeah. So as I said, I want to start not from epistemology, but from ontology. And ontology, the simplest way to understand it is that if that ontologies is a, a more if epistemology is how do we understand reality, ontology is what is reality itself. Yeah. So it is a more abstract and more fundamental question that you ask before you get onto epistemology. It is a question about the nature of reality itself. And it is at some level a question that primarily interests philosophers, but I would say that all of us should at least have a basic understanding of how it operates, and that basic understanding I think will really help us in understand our own place within this entire system of knowledge. How do I as a biologist fit into it? How do I as an economist fit into it? Yeah. So generally, ontology, there's three ontological approaches that I list here. Yeah. Or as I would say that there are three ways of understanding what reality is. Yeah. So the first one, which is says objectivist reality, and there is this idea that that the reality exists regardless of how we perceive it. And this is a very common thing in you would say in natural sciences. Yeah. So for some of you who are biologists, some of you who are physicists, this would seem like a very obvious thing. This seems like a truthism. Yeah, it's like an obvious truth. There, of course, like something like gravity. Gravity is the go-to example always in these cases. That gravity, if I test gravity today, if I test gravity 1,000 years ago, if I test gravity 1,000 years from now, if I test gravity in Pakistan, I test gravity in Morocco, I test gravity in the US, it should give me the same result. And the conclusion we draw from it is that the nature of reality, the laws of physics, they function, in a certain way, regardless how we perceive it or not. If humans exist, they don't exist. It doesn't really matter. The reality will exist in a certain way, and this is the idea we call it the objectivist understanding of reality. That there is a physical world that is created through, like you can have different explanations for the creation, but it is a physical world that ultimately behaves under certain fixed laws that exist regardless of time and place. Yeah. So that is the objectivist understanding, and it seems to natural sciences as the most obvious things. But if you go to an economist would say, you know, uh, yes, it's true that gravity exists, but what about things like market demand? Market demand, we would say that that demand, economic demand, is an equally important force that acts on our daily lives. Our lives are shaped as much by gravity, maybe as not as much, but to a great extent by demands of certain market. But that market is not a timeless entity. It is not an objective thing in that sense that the conditions of the market would remain the same regardless of if I study here or regardless of study there. If I study the market today versus if I study the market 100 years from now, the nature of demand, how demand is constructed, how demand operates, how demand goes up, how demand comes down, will change depending on the conditions in which it is found. Yeah. So, and this is an approach that social sciences, as you can see, would find it more useful. So social scientists would say, yes, like objectivists, yes, there are certain truths to the world, or let's say there's certain laws to the world, but those laws are constructed, not those laws exist not regardless of us, but precisely because of us. That we as human beings create those laws, we give it power by believing in them, and because we believe in them and we give them power and we create our structures around it, they become as real as gravity itself. Yeah. So demand, market of demand, whether I believe in market demand or I don't believe in market demands, market is going to be having certain pressures on me. Just like if I believe in gravity, I don't believe in gravity, it doesn't really matter. Gravity is going to have an impact on me. Yeah. So constructivists think, yes, there are certain laws, but those laws are constructed by us as human beings, and but they eventually end up, because we believe in them, they become very real things. But the third form, and this is much more common to humanities scholars, that like if you talk to an anthropologist, you talk to a historian, you talk to a literary guy, and they would say that they would agree that there are certain things in the world that we as human beings construct and they act upon us, but they would say that how you study them is not irrespective of the person who is studying it as well. They say that the nature of reality depends not just on how we as a social community construct them, but how we as individuals come to perceive those things as well. Yeah. So, for example, something like, say, you would say happiness, right? So if I am to study happiness, of course, like, or desires. Yeah. So desires are an extremely, again, important force that acts upon us and eventually acts upon the world and makes the world in a certain way. Yeah. Desires in Urdu, for those of you who understand, like khwahishat. So the desires that you have, the aspirations that you have, they are just as real of a force as gravity, as the market demands, because they go and they change the world, they change you, they change the social community around them. And subjectivists would say that the nature of reality as such, that that these desires, these affective conditions, these emotions, these hopes, they're all constructed internally by individuals. And we'll get into detail about them. They would even say, it's not just that individuals are free to make them as they choose, but ultimately they are built by individuals. And the next thing with that is, like, if they are constructed with an individual, if I am to study something, if I am to study how desires within, let's say, if I a classic anthropological project would be how desires within marriage are constructed, how within love marriage, ideas of romance are constructed. A subjectivist would say there's no, objective or even constructivist understanding of, desires of love that exists, universally, or that hold true, for extended period, even one place. They would say that those ideas can shift and change depending on who you are focusing on, depending on what your starting position is, depending on what you are looking at. Yeah. So these different, very fundamentally different ways of looking at the world. And it is important, you don't have to, say that I am this, I am that, I am this. People, move in between them. That's what nature of science is, that you debate them, you understand them, and you move across them. But it is essential, but understanding them is essential. Yeah, it is essential, and we'll get to it later why it is. Um, uh, so this is a slide that I've already touched upon this, and you've probably gotten a sense of this already, that these three ontological positions roughly cohere around three different disciplines. Yeah. So if you are a biologist, you're a physicist, you're probably an objectivist. If you are economist, you're a sociologist, you're a political scientist, you're probably a constructivist. Yeah. But if you're an anthropologist, you're a historian, you're a literary scholar, you're a subjectivist. And understanding these differences, as I said, are essential in also bridging differences around it. So whenever if you are a humanities guy and a naturalist or natural science guy, and comes to you and talks to you in a certain way, your immediate reaction could be, oh, no, 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 what are you talking about? Everybody constructs their own reality. And you may be true, because that's your own subjective position. But now what I urge you to do is, whenever you now hear about that, is to say, yes, what he is saying or what she is saying probably originates from their specific ontological reality through which that entire discipline and science is constructed. Yeah. So with that understanding, with that basic understanding, and then you use that to have a conversation. Yeah, you have that conversation, say, yes, you believe that, but have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? What if you think about reality in this way? What about we think on reality in that way? So that's how you basically have a conversation, is to understand where the other is coming from, how different forms of knowledge construct their truths. Yeah. So if we go now, I want to go to the main thing about epistemology itself. Epistemology, as I said, right now, it may seem to you as slightly contrary, but I want to make it clear that epistemology derives from ontology, as it says here. Yeah. So each ontological position can have different epistemological positions. The easiest way to understand it, as I say here, that if ontology is what is the nature of reality, epistemology is how can we understand that form of reality. So it is one step moving towards more research methods. If ontological is a very philosophical question, epistemology is where research really starts to come in. Because now you're talking about capturing that reality. You're not just talking about the nature of that reality. In abstract terms, you're talking about capturing that reality. Yeah. So it says that, how do we understand, it said, how do we know what we know? What are the systems and relationship to understanding reality that underpin knowledge production? Yeah. So it's not the from the question of what is reality to how do we understand reality. That's what we get to about with thinking about epistemology. I want to give this example of what is, the heliocentric epistemology. uh, for those of you who are in physics would be more familiar with it, that in the old world, the idea used to be that the earth is at the center of the universe and everything else revolves around it. And that was what the ontological position was. The nature of reality was such that the world is at the center. And the hence the kind of sciences that developed around it were accordingly. When we shifted from an understanding of reality in which the earth was not at the center but the sun was at the center of our solar system and earth was revolving around it, it also led to different kind of epistemological fields deriving around it. So a lot of the kind of fields of physics that emanated afterward. Yeah. So what we were talking about, gravity, for example, it came afterwards. So entire fields came afterwards. So with the shift in ontological understanding of how reality works, you actually see the emergence of new epistemologies as well. And that's a constant thing in human reality. And that's why I wanted to bring in ontology first. So just to ground yourself in it, that there is, epistemologies also don't come from nowhere. They actually come from different understandings of ontologies as well. So uh, I want to get to the the different kind of epistemology. Epistemologies are what I have listed here are uh, I'd say a very starter kit to understanding what epistemology is. This is not a definite or final understanding of what epistemology is. Uh, it is just initial few ideas, because if we get really into it, then it will become almost unmanageable. But these give us a very good foundation to thinking about the world at large. These five very fundamental epistemological positions. uh, Actually, I think I have an old I've uploaded an older word. This is an older version. I'm gonna change the slide. Just 1 second, sorry. I think this is not the right one. Uh 1 second. Uh, yes. Yes, that's it. Yes. So oh, no, this is the same. No, I think this is the same. Yes, sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, now you see it. Now you would see it.
I was thinking a meme that when you talk
Yeah.
of ontology and epistemology, it's like being a teacher with different strategies, but then
Hmm.
having philosophy of your philosophy of teaching that colors your
Hmm.
teaching. Would you do
Absolutely.
that analogy?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I think it is, like the uh even with teaching, you would say that that your understanding of your certain, you could have there's I'll get to a slide later on too, but there's methods, methodologies, epistemologies, and finally ontologies. So there's different steps in which you construct even your teaching theories as well. So ontology is the more fundamental things about, the easiest way to understand is what is your deepest and more abstract and fundamental understanding of how how we as a society construct. What is my, I think, that ontological, ontologically, the goal of learning is X, yeah, as the broadest way possible. And then epistemologically, you would say that I think that, that the most fundamental way in which one learns is this. And then with methodology, you want to break it down into further, and you say, in order to understand it in this way, this is the best method to do it. And then you would say, get to tools, that the best method, in order to the best method to apply this are these different tools, and then different strategies. So you want to, it's a more, let's say, like a pyramid knowledge of things. It's a more pyramid knowledge of things. But what I also want to encourage you guys to think about is that pyramid often kind of, confines us to think that we have to start from the beginning, from the on and first position, and then get to the last position. But that's not always true. You can often start somewhere in the middle. You can start somewhere in the end. You can say, I really like this tool. I really like this teaching tool. But why do I like it? Yeah. When you start thinking that why do I like it, then you say, okay, I like it because students perceive it in this way. Why do students perceive in this way? Because students, themselves, this is how they learn. Yeah. And then when you think about how they learn, and then you say, they learn in this way because this is how our world is constructed. Yeah. So you are getting from your own tool that has worked very well for you, your own, your teaching tool. You're getting from that through your own epistemological, ontological positions in a way. Yeah. So it's a way that it really helps you yourself clarify some ideas to you. I think that's why it's important. You may not teach it ever. You may not, like teach the students in this way. But as teachers ourselves, it's important for us to clarify some ideas in this way. Yeah. Sorry, I missed the kind of the older slides. This is the kind of that I wanted to the what I was talking about. That it's not a neat kind of construction with constructions as these ontological positions. Well, people often we're complicated beings. And one point you may think, yes, with gravity, it's true. Gravity is an objective truth, but economics is also a constructivist truth as well. So we live in this kind of contradictory thing. Yeah, so this is a Venn diagram that gives you a better idea about how these things are constructed. These are not neat differential positions, but they have their own kind of intersection points as well. Um, and this is the same slide that I showed you guys before, but a slightly more developed version of it. And as you can see, objectivist, it's natural science, and some definitions of it. When I'll share it with you guys later on, so you can read it more carefully as well. I don't want to read it for you guys now, so you can read it more carefully. But this is where we were epistemology arguments. So this is I said it's like ontology is what is reality, and epistemology is how do we know that reality, and as I said, the structure of it. And okay, so this is where we were, the kind of the 5 modes of thinking about. And as I said, just like with ontology, that we don't really need to say that I am a materialist, I am a positivist, I am a rationalist. So that's not the point that I want to emphasize in you guys, is to think of yourself in this box way. But what I want to tell you guys is that by understanding these different theories, you may be better able to understand your own methods, your own theoretical approach. You may be able to understand yourself better. You may be able to better understand your own teaching methods a little better by understanding some of these more fundamental things. Yeah. So let's start with rationalists. Rationalists, in many ways, might be what a lot of you may be very familiar with already. It's a common approach, especially to biologists. Yeah. And the basic idea of it is that that the world behaves by certain rules and laws and logics, and we can get to those rules and logics through inductive reasoning in themselves. Yeah. That if I am I think about the world deeply enough, then I can understand certain aspects of that reality by myself. maybe if I think about if I go to the key thinker or idea directly, that may be most familiar to you guys. I'm sure a lot of you guys would have heard of Descartes. Descartes was a very famous philosopher who had this phrase, which we've heard in various versions, where he says, I think, therefore I am. That is a classic idea of what rationalist thought is, because in this there's actually no empirical research. There's no, he hasn't actually done any kind of empirical study. There's no information that comes in. The only information that comes in is through reasoning from your own mind in itself. You say that that because I am thinking right now, that means that there is an I that exists. Yeah. So it is a truth about a world or certain understanding of a world that comes from you reasoning by yourself. Yeah. So that's the key features of it. It's like reason and logic, inductive reasoning, and a priori knowledge, that it is not depending on on empirical truths. Mathematical truths are in themselves. uh, Physics in certain ways does that too, and like certain fields, they may have an empirical base, but after those bases have developed to a certain extent, the empirical or new information in them becomes a very rudimentary point, or that becomes less important. Then it's just about figuring things out on a page. Yeah. So mathematicians do this often. Economists to a certain extent do it too. I would say physicists do it to a certain extent, where you already have certain models, where you certain have formulas, theories, and you're working with them without actually getting any new information about the world, and still producing some kind of knowledge of the world, or some truths about the world. Yeah. So rationalism is that older kind of, or a more fundamental kind of thinking. But the opposite side of rationalism is positivism. If rationalism is all about inductive reasoning, positivism is all about empirical data collection. Yeah. And it is this idea, it says that you cannot really know about the world unless you observe it through your own senses. Yeah. So it says that that if I read about gravity in a textbook, that is not enough. I will not really understand what gravity is until I see something falling from my own eyes. It's only when I see it from my own eyes, then I really understand the truth or the nature of that reality. Yeah. So, and it is this kind of epistemological, and you're automatically, I'm guessing you're automatically seeing some relationships to it in ontological positions, even if it is not very uh, clear one-to-one mapping. Yeah. For example, that both rationalism and positivism can in many ways be what do you call it, they can be objectivist realities, but they can also be constructivist truths as well. Yeah. So like mathematical models, like economic models, they can be kind of they can have a kind of you can have a very rationalist empiricism to a rationalist epistemological truth to it, but it can ultimately be a constructive, but it can in its basis it's constructivist too. Yeah. So, but to get to positivism again, the idea of positivism is that empiricism is everything. You have to observe the world, you have to know the world, you have to think about the world. Yeah. And this is a method that is common to various disciplines actually, until now. And the the idea it is in this is the that positivism, like what do you call it, constructivism, it says that that the goal is not just to observe things, but it is to observe them enough and to eventually see patterns in that observations, and from the basis of those patterns deducing uh, certain what do you call it, uh, certain laws or certain ways, certain fixed ways in which the world operates. Yeah. So it's not just enough that I observe that, that I see an apple falling once and I think it is gravity, but it is that I see that apple following in different times, in different places, in different contexts, and then on the basis of that, I come up with a specific, uh, argument that says that gravity exists. Yeah. So positivism, like rationalism, wants to ultimately get to the idea that there are certain laws and patterns and fixed ways in which our world works, in which truth is constructed, and our goal is to observe that, to capture it through empirical observation, which can be through listening, through seeing, through smelling, through feel, so on and so forth. Yeah. And this is an idea that is very common. The thinker that I've talked about is August Comet, who who was one of the foundational thinkers of what social science is. And he basically came up with this idea that that just like gravity operates under fixed laws, you can even have human behaviors that can fix under certain very fixed ways. Like as we were talking about, like demand, economic demand can't work under fixed ways. And we can capture the laws in which it operates through very specific designed things that can or specific design instruments that work without our bias. Yeah. So positivism is that that you can capture the truth without bias itself. But to move from positivism to another idea, materialist or materialism. Some of you may be familiar through it from the works of Karl Marx, who is the most important thinker in thinking about materialism or materialist thought. Materialist or materialist thinkers think that that they are still positivist in that sense that they still think that yes, there are certain laws that govern our truth, and those laws can be either objectivist or they can be constructivist, but there are certain laws, and but and but that the goal for us is not to capture or know those laws through pure empirical observation in itself, but it actually requires some kind of rigorous intellectual unthinking or intellectual framing, or what he calls dialectical methods to actually get to that reality in itself. Because he has this very, Marx has this very critical argument. He says that the world is like a camera obscure, that our observations, what we observe is always upside down. Yeah, it is an upside down, and he uses this idea of a pinhole camera. For those of you who are from physics, you may understand it that a pinhole camera, it's how cameras got invented. That you have a box in which you have a small hole, but the image in which it is projected, that image is usually cast upside down. And he says that our observation in many ways is like that, and it is like that because what we understand in the world is not that our sights are this kind of unbiased, unfiltered tools of observing reality how they are, but he says our sight, our hearing, our sounds are tainted by certain frames of understanding of the world, what he calls ideas and ideologies. Yeah. So if I am a religious guy, and if I was to see the world, if I was to see something happening, my mind would process it in a way that is tainted by that framework of understanding of it. If I am a nationalist, then I would see it in a certain way. Yeah. And that and Marx says that it's impossible for you to think that you can ever think about in unbiased way. No one is ever unbiased, because from the very birth, we are inculcated in different kinds of ideas and ideologies and certain ways of existing in the world, be it religion, be it nationalism, be it family, be it certain liberalism, civilizational thinking, whatever it is. But there's certain ideas that always shape our understanding of our reality. It's never an unfiltered truth that what we see. So for Marx says, and that Marx says that truth is actually held together not by this kind of what empiricists would say, by that these certain patterned ways that the world operates by itself, because that's just how the world is. That like physics, that human beings are also observed in patterned ways. But he says that patterns, those fixed ways of doing things, actually are about power relationships. Yeah. So there's nothing objective about them. He says that they exist in the way that they do because people historically have wanted it to be in that way, that it benefits certain people. That's why the world exists in the way that it does. So he says that the idea is about demand. He says there's nothing natural in that, and in the idea that we as human beings desire to consume objects. Yeah, that we do right now, right? That I want a car, I want a house, I want the fancy things. He says there's nothing natural about the fact that we desire those things, even though it may seem very natural to us. It may seem that it's really coming from inside us. We are not trying to impress anyone. But he says because our mind is structured in certain ways, because the power structures, the capitalist structure of capitalism makes us demand certain things. That's why we observe it as reality. Yeah. So Marx says that the goal or the empirical method that we need is that we need to combine empiricism with very specific understandings about how power structure works, about how, and he calls this method dialectical method. And I personally think it's a very powerful method. What dialectical method thinks is that in order to understand any truth, you can't just observe it at one point or at one place, but you have to see the back and forth. Yeah. So you have to see the back and forth. He says that how is desire produced by this certain idea, and how does that idea in turn produce another desire. He says the relationship between like ideologies and material condition, it's not a one-to-one relationship that it happens that the idea comes once and then it impacts it, but it says they continue to shape the back and forth, they continue to shape each other. And that true relationship between them we can only trace if we trace it in history. So if we trace it like how is it that like for example like patriarchy. Yeah. Why is it that men work outside and women work at home? It's an idea that exists, let's say, for thousands of years it may exist, but that does not mean that it's a natural idea. Marx would say that even if it exists for thousands of years, it exists because of the way in which the power relationship works. And he says then our goal is to understand across those 1,000 years how that back and forth has existed. And he actually takes it a step further, that he says and that he says it's not just, our goal is not just to understand it, but perhaps but also to change that reality. Yeah. So Marx materials thinking is somewhere in between that kind of objectives, and now we'll get to the other end of that spectrum, which is the kind of more culturalist, ideationalist, interpretive thinking. There's also a great quote by Marx. We can maybe come back to it later too, but it indicates what he understands of epistemology. He says that yes, that there's certain like there's a certain cage around which we find ourselves. So there is an objective reality in which we as human beings exist, and we don't make our history of our own choosing. So that we make our own history, but we don't do it in our own conditions. So we make the best of the conditions that we are given in some ways. Yeah. So again, emphasizing this kind of place in between. The third feature, and this is now we're getting, now you're probably seeing also this kind of gradual ontological shift as well, from the more objectivist, from the more constructivist, to now the more subjectivist position with interpretive and culturalist epistemological approaches. Yeah. So I've told you guys, how the mathematical models would be, constructed, how physics models are constructed, philosophical models are constructed. We've talked about how economic models, even, like something like sociological models are constructed. But now we're getting to more the softer sciences, like, history, anthropology, literature. Um, Within those ideas, within these kind of, these disciplines, the epistemological idea is that that if, our truth is changing, if it is subjective, um, then how we understand that, or our goal of understanding that world is not to understand its objective reality, but is to understand how we as human beings make it meaningful. Yeah. So, so for example, the easiest way to understand it would be like, you can understand the idea of gravity, as, in numbers itself. But why is it meaningful to me? It is meaningful to me because, I'm staying grounded to the world, and I'm staying grounded to the world. Is it becomes meaningful to me because then I can construct things, I can do certain things. So the idea is that, that what I say in this key feature here is to think not just, you know how is the reality being constructed, but why is it being constructed in that way. It is moving from the question of how to the question of why. From the it is or the another way to think about it is that the interpretive and culturalist epistemologies are always interested in meaning making. How do we make meaning of the world? And they say, they think that the world, if there is no meaning in the world, then the world itself, there's no point to science itself. And there are certain truths to it. Yeah. So if we have no society, we have no human beings, then what's the point of the science in itself? They said that science in itself also, becomes powerful because we as human beings have imbued with it with certain meanings. We have invested certain meaning in it. We have certain significance in it. And that is why it is important. And their goal is that we want to understand how is that meaning constructed. And that they say that meaning is constructed not in that abstract, or not in any objectivist way, but it is constructed internally within our own selves. Yeah. um that it is a world that is, that uh, changes depending the or your understanding of the world, what world looks like, changes depends on from whose perspective you are talking about. Yeah. So as it shows here, the cultural context, the context becomes very important. Uh, the and you can have multiple truths. You can have multiple. So unlike in the earlier versions where the which is, the qualitative and quantitative version, difference as well. I won't get too much into it because I think in later lectures you'll get more into it as well, the qualitative and quantitative difference. But that's one of the basic difference in this, is that, if you are let's say a positivist, or if you are a rationalist, then whatever your epistemological research, whatever the truth that leads to, you would assume that whatever truth that I have reached, another researcher should reach that same truth, and it is a truth only if everyone reaches that same conclusion. Yeah. If my conclusion of, the speed at which, things fall from earth is different from somebody else, then, both of us are wrong. That's the positivist, and that's the rationalist point of view, that both of us is wrong because we need to have a universal application. But interpreter says that if I as a researcher says that, marriage, the marriage works because, or patriarchy works because, it increases, desire for women to be mothers. But somebody else says, no, it works in that way because it creates a desire for, for women to be safe and stay at home. Yeah. Or it's because women are afraid of going out. Yeah. Both truths, or both can be truth in themselves, and it can be okay that both of us reach different conclusions, and that can still be true. That is what interpretive and culturalist understanding basically means. And we'll get to different theorists in this, because I think we're also, like, I think slightly running short of time. So I'll get to certain thinkers, and maybe we can get to examples to think about the differences around it too. But it is, in a caricature way. I just want to maybe point out this before we go. In a caricature way, people often think that subjectivist or interpretive thinks that nothing is true and everything works. But they actually, the point of it is that that the truths that we construct for ourselves are actually just as important and just as powerful as the objective truths in themselves world. Yeah. So, like, things like, why is, things like, religion, like, why do we as humanities have thought about like God, the idea of God, why has that been so significant in shaping human reality for so long? It's a foundational understanding of thing, and it is the only way to get it is through kind of interpretive culturalist understanding as well. Yeah. Now, I want to get, before going on to kind of summing up some of these things, I want to touch this last point, this last kind of this idea. It is a more emergent idea, I would say. It's an idea, empirical uh, approach that is slightly new, a more um, a newer epistemological approach called deconstructivist or post-constructivist. And it basically says that it takes, in some ways, what interpretive and culturalist ontological understanding it is. They take that ontological understanding to its other logical extreme. It says that if reality is subjectivist, and if reality is always subjective, and it is constructive to individual understanding of the world, then ultimately everything is in a flux. Then what meaning that we give to the world, how we know the truth, how we study the world, how systems of science are worked, they are always in a flux. So in some ways, one also calls it an anti-empiricist approach, because they say, or an anti-rationalist approach, anti-scientific approach too, in some ways, because they say that that whole hierarchy of science, the systems of science, the architecture of knowledge that I've been talking about until now, post-structuralist says that it is construct that your idea that you can construct an architecture of science in itself is built on a fallacy. It's built on a fallacy that that our understanding or truths of the world, there's a stable base for it. But it says, depending on the context, depending on the culture, depending on the world, depending on individuals, those shared things shift, radically. And in many ways, the empirical outcome for it is that post-structuralists or deconstructivists, uh, rather than producing their own forms of truth, their own, let's say, epistemological systems, they destabilize existing epistemological structures. Yeah. So they make us question things. So even if you don't buy into it, even if you don't do it, I think it is a very important point to consider in our understanding, or important point to consider in how we understand the truth. Now, just to kind of start to bring things together and to lay the base for some of the lectures that will come first, this gives you a kind of a flow chart of where what we've been talking about. Yeah. So we've talked about ontology, the first point that we talked about. What is reality? Epistemology, what and how can I know reality or knowledge? This is the five theories that I talked about. But then when and this is where what you were talking about, like how do we bring it to like more teaching theory as well. From epistemologies, then you go into different theoretical perspectives. So what I was talking about Marx, what I was talking about with like with gravity, or Auguste Comte, or Weber, and so on. Those were people who had a certain ontological understanding, certain epistemological perspective understanding, and from that basis, they created their own theoretical models or theoretical perspective. This is one level of more applied science. Yeah. So it gets one level further from epistemology itself. It's, now we're talking about specific approaches. Yeah. So dialectical materialism. Yeah. Dialectical material science. So, it's a theoretical perspective that, things, you know, don't, reality just doesn't emerge, in one instant, one moment, but it is constructed across 1,000 years. It's a specific theoretical perspective. Yeah. And once you have a specific theoretical perspective, then you get into methodology. Methodology is that, you say, okay, if I'm, to study fire understanding is that, that, it's, 1,000 years, what methods can I follow to it? And you would say, okay, one method is that, uh, is archival approach. I am going to be looking at these manuals or these stories across 1,000 years. Yeah, that's a methodological approach. Um, one step further from it is then the methods. The method is, how are you going to be looking at those stories? Yeah, how are you going to be looking at, say, I'm going to be do a literary analysis, or some would say, what, I'm not going to be doing a literary analysis. I'm going to be looking for some certain keywords, and those keywords I'm going to create a database, and from those database I'm going to create some charts. Yeah. So versus doing like the keyword approach to looking at theories, that gets into from methodology to method, and the source is that the stories themselves are the source. Yeah. So as I said, you don't always have to start from saying, this is my ontology, this is my epistemology, this is my theoretical. No, that's not how it works. Nobody really thinks like that. Yeah. And most people actually work across it. But what I urge you to guys to think about, and what I hope that you come out of this entire series, is that you can place your own work, your own knowledge within this kind of flow chart. Yeah. No matter where you start, you can start with the source. You say that, say, I work on, I look really at this cell, that very specific, like, cell. I'm a microbiologist. I look at this cell. Then you start to think backwards. Okay, I look at the cell. What is the methods that I'm thinking about? What is the methodology? What are the theoretical perspectives? And once you start doing that, then you will see that at some point in time, you will start to see overlaps from microbiology to, you would say, pathology. uh, and from pathology you would start seeing with chemistry. From chemistry you would start seeing similarities with public health, and from the public health, eventually when you get to ontology, then you can see that actually you can actually even have conversations with philosophers. You can have conversations with anthropologists. Yeah. If you can construct, if you can understand your own work within this flow chart. And this is also a way in which what I started with, the initial thing that I told you guys, that my concern and what I hope that you come out of it is with certain sense of confidence that we in the global south can actually be knowledge producers. We don't really just have to be knowledge consumers or knowledge replicators. We can be producers. In order for us to be knowledge producers, we need to understand how this architecture of knowledge produced, because then you can understand, because and that is limitations in a lot of our works across the discipline. It's not blaming anyone, it's just like a structural thing that our work often is limited to it can be very rigorous about the very specific things. Yeah. I'm a historian, so I know there's very Pakistani historians who do great stuff about this one, 1947 August to December 1947, this one village, what happened. Yeah. Very rigorous, very close, very neat, very observant work. But the problem remains that other Pakistanis would be interested in it, other scholars would be interested in it, who are interested in South Asia or in that era. What if I am a Latin Americanist? Will I be interested in it? No, those Latin Americanists would read Weber, they would read Marx, they would read the same Western theorists. But my argument is that you can be thinking about partition in that very specific case and still have something very important to say to somebody who's working on Latin America, somebody who's working on Europe. And you can only get to that point if you understand this flowchart. When you understand this flowchart, then you can say, okay, how do I move from this one abstract above? That if my, method is saying that it is showing me that, look, that people are not behaving this way, but this way. Then you say, what, this way in which people is acting, this seems to challenge what Marx was saying about this. And then when you say it's challenging the way that it thinks about this, then it's challenging a theoretical perspective. And then you say, no, actually, by challenging this theoretical perspective, you can actually say something meaningful about epistemology at large. So you can make your argument more abstract. You can make it understandable to a wider geography of scholars. You can make it understandable to a more interdisciplinary group of scholars. And that is what I hope that all of you get out of this entire series, not just this talk, is this confidence to think about yourselves as knowledge producers and to have conversations across a wide, a wide kind of disciplinary system, like across disciplines as well. Yeah. So with that, I want to end the formal conversation. My apologies if this has been too long or if it's got too boring, but now we can get into the more interesting part with the Q&A. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, Ameem, I was marveling, and so was everybody. I looked at your agenda, and believe me, I looked at those words and thick terms, and I said, my God, it's going to be a boring session. But you made it so gripping and so meaningful. And I was just talking to Mavish that we never thought of it. But look at the scope it opens up about research and the framework it offers us to work. We never thought about it, but I think this should be the starting point, irrespective, that we should know the framework in which we can use our work and place ourselves. And this idea
Absolutely.
about making it for the wider audience is so powerful. And I think something that we should consider. I do not see many questions. There's only a couple of Hadika Sohail from Air University seems to be somebody who has read about these theories a lot, and she talks about, and this is something that you will have to answer. I couldn't. Can you elaborate more on differences and similarities between post-structuralists and deconstructivists? Now, perhaps he's going into the deeper divisions within these terms, or they are one and almost same perspectives.
Yeah. They are, I would say, similar in roots, but the emphasis for them is slightly different. So a post-structuralist would say, both of them would, uh, um, uh, they would have the same epistemological position that there is no stable base of or systems of or around which the world works. They say that both of would agree that things are constantly in flux, they are shifting, and any point in time that we intervene, it's a random arbitrary point in time. But a post-structuralist would then say that there is perhaps no meaning, or there is, they would say then that they get into, let's say, more interpretive, understandings of things. Yeah, a post-structuralist. Yeah, so like literary theory is very post-structuralist. They would get into more arts, more culture, things like that. But a deconstructivist would say that no, that we agree that that I agree with post-structuralists that this the same problem, but they say that the remedy is different. They said that the remedy is not that we produce these kind of literary texts and so on, but they say that our goal or the remedy is to challenge existing systems. So deconstructivists would take the existing structures much more head on, rather than going off as a tangent as what do you call it, post-structuralists would do. Deconstructivists would then talk about trying to dismantle our and trying to challenge our existing ideas in that sense. So that's the kind of the I would say difference is more theoretical perspective rather than epistemological approach. Like theoretical perspective and then methods become slightly different between the two. That's the difference.
Interesting. Interesting. From Mohammed Azim from GMont, KMU Karachi Medical University, perhaps, wants to know if we can give an example where we can compare all these approaches for practical purposes and for further clarification. I think you did give some along the way, but about ontology as well as epistemology. So I have just one. I think what he's saying is one example and how each would interpret it differently or something like that.
Yeah. Let me see if I can do a one that exists, for everyone, because um, it's a challenging one. Let's see. Let me think about. Okay, then, one way, one interesting way is thinking about. Let's say that um, currently within uh, uh, there's an idea within anthropology that's very popular, and it is very, that how would I say it? Like, it's a very subjectivist position, but that ultimately leads to also implication for very objectivist implementation. And that idea is that says that um, that, for example, if that what I was working with earlier, like desires, yeah, so desires, you would say that desires ultimately are ideational things, they're subjective things, but people now say that those desires actually produce a certain kind of reality into the world. Yeah, okay, that we started, that humne hame desire, that the system produced this kind of desire for consumption. ज़्यादा चीजें खरीदें, ज़्यादा चीजें लें, हम जो है बड़ी गाड़ियां हो, बड़े घर हो. तो उन desires से ultimately what it led to was a certain kind of world that exists, that was produced. Yeah, so now we're getting into more materialist ideas as well. Yeah, so it created a certain industrialist section. Yeah, so this industrialist section, then you would say that ultimately then also started to have its own objectivist implications on the world. Climate change job them dikh rahe na. So global ice cap melting, it's an objective truth. Yeah, so it's an objective truth uh, that they are melting, but it's an objective truth that is actually produced by a subjective understanding of the world. So the idea now is, there's a current idea is that these things are not actually as disconnected, but our own subjective understanding of the world is producing objective implications for the reality as such. So if I am to study climate change, right? Climate change is that kind of situation. I can study climate change as an objectivist, ontologically, epistemologically. I could do it, as a rationalist. I could do it as a, if I'm a rationalist, then I would say, climate change. I would think about, certain, models that have already existed of temperature. Yeah. If I'm working with those models and I get into the sophisticated math of it, that is a very rationalist way of thinking about it. If I say that I am going to go to the polar caps and I'm going to put sensors, and those polar caps are going to be measure how much things are melted, then that is a more positivist way of thinking about it. If I say I am going to do an interpretive thing of it, interpretive thing is I would say that I am going to be thinking about, how uh, uh, certain ideas about growth actually led to a world in which climate change impacted. If I am doing to do a materialist perspective, I would say how those ideas of growth are linked to specific people accumulating capital, specific people becoming richer, specific people becoming more powerful. But if I am a deconstructivist, I would say if I am to understanding climate change, my goal uh, is to challenging existing ideas about how sciences work, and to show how sciences themselves are subjective. Yeah. So that is, in maybe one way. The climate change is one example where you actually do see across the board different people applying the same methods and coming with different conclusions, but still having a discussions among themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm lots of audience wants slides. You will get the recording and the slide. There was one more. Can the approaches of ontology support each other in different domains to get the accurate method direction? And I'm not sure if I understand the question. Do you?
Yeah. Again, I want to maybe emphasize, go back to what I was saying about, thinking of ourselves as producers of knowledge. If we are producers of knowledge, then one of the things is we need to forget this idea that, what is, exactly the correct way of doing things. That is exactly the way in which, we become reproducers, because we're always thinking that if I am doing, is it the right thing or is it the wrong thing? And I've thought, मैंने पाकिस्तान में भी पढ़ा है, मैंने बाहर भी पढ़ा है, और पाकिस्तान में जब मैं पढ़ाता हूँ तो पाकिस्तान के बच्चों के अंदर जो मुझे मेन फर्क भी नजर आता है ना, उसमें they're great students, but they're always trying to ask me what is the right answer, and I tell them, there is no right answer. The right answer, you could have the wrong answer, but you can make a strong enough case to convince me it is the right answer, and I'll believe you it's the right answer.
Yeah.
Right. So, and that is what I want you to think, is that if your method is thorough, if your process is thorough, if you have given it enough time, you have given it enough knowledge, you have given it enough, rigorous thinking, then you can get across it. And as I said, about interpretation, like the goal is, of course, to think across these things. Yeah. You don't have to be binded to saying, I am this thing, I am that thing, but it is to constantly think about, it across it. But you can only think across it once you know how the boundaries lay. Then you can transcend them. But to know to transgress, you have to know the boundaries first.
Yeah. Excellent. Very satisfied. The question, the person who asked the question. Ijaz Heather, thank you. My question is, how can we opt an optimistic approach in social science, especially decolonizing climate change research from people's perspective? As you said,
Yeah.
the social scientists are optimistic.
Yeah. No, I'm not sure if social scientists are optimistic. I may have misspoke. But what I want to emphasize is that I think this is a place in which, climate change is an area of study in which we really can be the world leaders in producing knowledge, because the implications of this are going to reach our part of the world much before they reach any other part of the world. Yeah. The complexity of the crisis that we are facing is much more different from any other place in the world. Like place like Pakistan, we have floods, we have, hurricanes, we have, desertification, we have ice cap meltings, we have heat waves, we have so many things. And it is, a mixture of human related factors, it is global factors, it is local factors, it is, more physics things. So we are in a situation in which, unfortunately, because of the kind of, the situation that we are in, I think our burden is to then, like raise the voice first, that we have to be the guys who lead the flag talking about climate change, because we are the ones who are impacting by it the most. And that's why we also need to think across these disciplines the most as well, because we need to say that we need to be able to say, look, what you are doing in the West, it's not just our problem, it is your problem too. And it is not, we are not just source of the problem, you are the source of the problem as well. But for us to make that argument, we need to have a more fundamental things about how climate change is working, how it is being impacted, how we can talk to them. So so I think, it is imperative that we do, but it is imperative that we, not just do the empirical recording of ways in which climate change is impacting things over here, but also push ourselves to talk to people in other places too, to convince them about why lessons emerging from it are important from them too.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I must say, I was looking at the numbers, and they only dropped after 1 hour and some 10 minutes, because I'm sure like our faculty have only a break between 1 to 2 p.m. and many were like, we have to leave because of other commitments. But the number stayed very stable around 250. That was shocking.
I'm
And
glad.
I must say, the excitement with which you teach and the passion in your voice is so clear. No student could go ignorant from your class, and that was remarkable. I must thank you. And the polling shows very satisfied faculty. And as you can see, I'm sharing the results, and many have answered. So 66% participating, and a resounding satisfaction and learning, actually. There's nobody saying no, literally. Everybody says yes. So we are very, very thankful to you for your session. I haven't read on any of these approaches because I'm a medical science major. This is Sayyid Muhammad Ahmed from UCP. But I want to ask, as someone who's starting masters in drug delivery systems, am I restricted to rationalist approach that
Not at all.
or not at all? But how I see it is that these way of thinking shouldn't be shackles, absolutely. And we should be able to opt a positive or even an interpretive approach, or even a deconstructivist approach,
Absolutely.
depending on what kind of problems we are tackling. Absolutely. You got it dot on. So I think we all understood what you were saying. So thank you so much. And just on another note, you're starting to get the teacher's cough. I got it after some years of teaching, and on the throat, the doctor said there's no way around it. You just have a throat that most teachers have because they are standing in a class, in person, large class, and trying to talk out loud. In our days, we didn't have this system, speaker system. So I remember teaching a class of 150 in a big hall, but there was no control. It was crazy. So how do we categorize our research approaches, Muhammad Bilal, in our discipline as objectivist? Please elaborate, researchers. I think that's all we did, Bilal, in this section. I am sorry. We will share the recordings and the slide with you. Please do go over them. And I think it should be very, very clear. Thank you. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, great. It was a great session. I mean, you're forgiven for not responding to us as often. Beautiful session. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you, everyone, for being with us. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, everyone. All right. Bye bye.
Bye bye.